Hi, my name's Phil. I'd like to talk about politics. So, do we remember that boast from Boris Johnson about delivering a stupendous level of COVID testing that would mean the equivalent of testing everyone in the country on a weekly basis by Christmas this year at a cost of £100 billion? Well, it seems that they've had to scale their aims a little bit backwards. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So, Operation Moonshot it was called, which sounds like a project for a space agency, not a healthcare project for dealing with a major pandemic. Of course, if the moonshot involved blasting Cummings and Johnson into orbit around the moon for, let's say, a couple of years, that would actually do more good for our COVID response than anything else that's been tried. But no, it was the name given to another madcap idea of Dominic Cummings, proudly boasted about by Boris Johnson, to test tens of millions of people in the UK a week by Christmas as a way of finally getting on top of the infection rate. And in theory, if it could be made to work, I suppose it would work. I mean, you know, 10 million people tested a day is the equivalent of everyone in the country being tested each week. No doubts about it. You would massively scale this thing back, snuff it out altogether in no time. You know, if you could have a much more precisely targeted of people for isolation duties. Because at the moment, we know full well that the majority of people isolating don't really need to isolate. They just don't know that they don't need to isolate. So we have to be cautious. So if you could only have those isolating who were known to be infectious, that would mean fewer healthy people having to isolate and, you know, being out of school or work or anything else. There were just a couple of small flaws in the plan. So first of all, you know, tests have to be made. Sourcing 10 million tests a day isn't just a problem of funding. How do you source the materials, processing facilities and the lab space for analysing the tests? There's no immediate plan for that. And secondly, so our current testing is already incredibly inefficient. And yet we were supposed to go from one of the least effective testing nations in the developed world to by far and away the best in a few months. All right then. Now, many people were not convinced. I have to say I was amongst them. Even Boris Johnson tried to distance himself from the original Operation Moonshot boasts. About a week or so later, I think it was. Unfortunately, he'd gone on television to announce it. Which not only means it's all recorded, but given that he long ago abandoned daily press briefings for COVID, what it meant was that the fact that he'd gone on telly was now an uncommon event, so it made it stick in people's minds a bit better. But now the project has been formally scaled back. So there was a pilot study in Greater Manchester, which is one of the hardest hit by COVID currently. And it's shown that, do you know what? Mass testing isn't all that feasible when run by private companies who know nothing about public healthcare and don't even seem to be learning lessons after 6 months of trying to deliver the most important public health project in generations. I mean, we shouldn't really be surprised that the government are missing yet another testing target. They haven't met a single one. They've had to fiddle the figures every time. Their first major testing target, for those who recall, for spring was 100,000 a day. They claimed on the day itself that they'd actually met it, but the way they claimed that was by fiddling the figures. They were counting one person tested as two because there are 2 bits to the test. They were counting tests that hadn't actually been carried out, but were going to be at some point in the future. You know. So they hadn't actually met the 100,000 a day. I think it's only very recently that they've even managed that, except now it's been claimed that we're carrying out many more. Of course we're not. The government figures don't back that up. And what we're supposed to be doing is we're supposed to be doing 500,000 tests a day by the end of this month. Now, that is going to be failed even by fiddling the figures. Even the government are not going to be able to claim that one. So Operation Moonshot was supposed to test all the people of Salford. That's about 250,000 people in Greater Manchester. The aim was to use this form of mass testing on the whole community scale. So the idea was that residents wouldn't have to social distance. So we social distance because we do not know who is infectious. We have to behave as if we are infectious and we wish to prevent other people becoming infected. We also have to behave as if we are not infected, but everyone else is. So with testing all the time, people wouldn't need to go around assuming that everyone was infectious. They could behave normally until they tested positive. So the theory went, I don't know to what extent that is backed up scientifically, but that is the idea. Then if the trials were successful, or when the trials were successful, it would be scaled up and it would eventually be rolled out across the country. So we've had 6 weeks of trials, which have now, or they were paused, they were stopped. The government are now scaling back the plans of Operation Moonshot to focus, instead of everyone, because the idea was we test everyone. The whole premise of the concept was test everyone, then people don't have to social distance. If they test positive, then they isolate. That was what it is. So now they're scaling it back to focus on what they are calling high-risk environments and groups. I mean, if this were a space mission, it'd be the equivalent of saying, look, we're having problems getting enough rocket fuel, so I'll tell you what we're going to do. We'll ditch the rockets, get the catapult out. I mean, apart from anything, because it doesn't do. It cannot then do what the basic premise is. The premise was to test everyone. Now you're saying we're just going to test targeted groups of people. Apart from anything else, isn't scaling down the project in that way to only cover those selected groups what the government already claimed testing does right now? I mean, isn't that what testing does? Targeted groups, the groups that have got symptoms of COVID, for example, or the groups who are most at risk. I mean, we know that that's not what our testing is actually doing right now, because we still have frontline healthcare workers not being routinely tested when they were supposed to have been months ago. But if you were, let's say you were to believe the government just for a moment, that and that you believe the government when it said it's delivering the test that it says it is, then this newly scaled back Operation Moonshot actually doesn't sound like an improvement on our current testing at all. I mean, it should probably be renamed Operation Top of the Hill. In fact, if anything, it could be argued it'll be aiming to deliver less than we currently have right now. Also, what about the budget? It was given a budget of £100 billion. Is that going to be scaled back too? Or are we still going to have all that money ending up in private hands and the bill handed over to the taxpaying public, as with everything else? So Rebecca Long-Bailey, who's the, you may know her as the former Labour leadership candidate. Now, she is the MP for one of the areas trialling this in Salford, Operation Moonshot there. And she noted that her local council had asked the Department for Health, because they were engaging in this trial. So they asked the department to furnish them with the clinical validity data that underpinned the confidence in the new technology that was supposed to deliver this epic feat of mass testing. And Long-Bailey said that the council had told her that they were still waiting for that response from the government weeks later. So she made a direct query to the Health Secretary, Matt Hancock. You know, what are your plans now for mass testing? You know, given that her area of Salford has been told to pause the trials. So she didn't hear back from him either. So then she was due to bring up the issue in the House of Commons. She was going to ask the question when, just as she was about to do so, the Department of Health hastily told Salford Council to actually carry on. You don't have to pause the trials anymore. On you go. Now, presumably they did this because the government did not want the failure of the trials to be raised as a question in Parliament and put on record, or the Health Secretary just didn't fancy answering the question in Parliament. Now, quite what's really going on is difficult to ascertain, other than the fact the government are saying that they can't quite get enough volunteers to sign up to the trial. But isn't that then fundamentally an issue of government trust? But the Mayor of Salford says that he was told that the trial had been paused due to uncertainty over the accuracy of the new swabless saliva testing system. But the Department of Health have said that the test has proven to be effective. So we've got a bit of a discrepancy here. So what it appears to be is that the Department of Health seem to be calling either the Mayor of Salford or the Salford Council leaders that informed the Mayor of Salford liars. So that's what they're saying. The Salford leaders are liars. Okay, fine. They may be. I don't know them. But that still leaves us none the wiser as to why the government paused the trials. And as I say, it's a bit suspicious that they unpaused them just as the local MP was about to stand up and raise it in Parliament. Also, I have to say, the Department for Health say that the tests have proven to be effective. So I tried to find out. I did not find this out. What I did find was that there's a certain scientific consensus being widely reported across the political spectrum. This is not just in left-leaning papers, but right-leaning ones as well, and other forms, that the new tests are actually not as effective as those currently available. They are less effective than the ones we're using right now. So the government seem to be essentially pinning their hopes on the fact that the tests are quick. Now that's a boon, that's a benefit, quick tests, but not accurate. It's a classic case of confidence then, isn't it? What they want is, they don't care if people are infected or not, or if they know who's infected or not. What they care about is that people believe themselves to not be infected so they can carry about their normal behaviour, feeding the coffers of rich Tories. Because one issue with the effectiveness of these tests, apparently, is that if the saliva sample is contaminated, and I don't mean it's not taken correctly, I mean, you know, from the own person, like blood, say, in the saliva, then the test becomes much less accurate. So maybe the government were hoping that the accuracy would somehow be improved over time. Maybe you can sort of think, they'll think, well, these trials are going to take time anyway. By then, they may have made the test more accurate. You know, I'm not sure what their basis for thinking that would be. Maybe they just assume scientists will work it out somehow. But that's assuming that they still intend this to be a mass testing system for the future. I mean, that's why Rebecca Long-Bailey asked the Health Secretary, what is your plan for mass testing now? Because the trials that are carried out now are not mass testing. They're not trials for mass testing, but Operation Moonshot was supposed to be for mass testing. So she asked the Health Secretary, how are you going to get from where we are now, which is a much scaled back version, which is not at all mass testing, to mass testing? I know. I mean, yeah, I can understand in theory, sometimes you have to take a step back to go forwards. You know, you can in theory scale it back to sort out some, you know, trouble with the system, and then you scale it back up. But if that's what's intended, why doesn't the Health Secretary just say so? Why is he refusing to answer that question? You know, is it that we're not going to now carry on with mass testing? In which case, what is this operation for? Is it going to be anything other than just another expensive dead end? But anyway, those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.